Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Friday night edition of Beyond the Pale with RB Ham. I am your host, and welcome. And tonight I have as my guest Matthew Ehret, who I've just ran across in the last month or so. I've been watching and reading what he's been up to, and I was so impressed. I got two of his books, Volume 3 and Volume 4, The Forgotten Struggle for Progress and Caught Between Two Worlds. And if we ever meet, I got to get you to sign them.
All right.
Unfortunately, because I'm running in the upcoming election, I have not had time to read them. They only got here on Monday, and I will be reading them. I've been perusing through them, and I've heard you talk about it before, and it's just fascinating. You envision a better future for this country, one free of the shackles of monarchy or international corporatism. And if you think about it, we are an incredibly blessed country with all these rich natural resources and a small population. I mean, we're the size of the Soviet Union and have 1/10 of their population. We should all be living like kings. Could you expound upon that and your vision?
Yeah, man, that's a great intro. Yeah, and I'm super happy that you picked up the books, and I'm sure you're gonna love it. The way you set it up was fantastic, and I think you're right. Canada is pure potential, and it's potential that the way I found myself trying to make sense of what is this enigma that I was born into, that is Canada, this monarchy with a privy council and this whole unelected shadow government enshrined into our very constitutional fabric over a century ago. And it took me a long time to start figuring out a way of looking at the process that would make sense, knowing that we have an oligarchy that has been latching onto humanity like a parasite since the days of the ancient Roman Empire. And there's this unbroken continuity. So for me, I was trying to figure out the simple but very difficult answer to the question: if my life has been a lie since I think I started. For me, it was like 9/11 20 years ago. That was my shakeup that broke me out of my sort of normieism. But then the question is, like, okay, if we have these international bankers, these financiers, these conspiracies that have been transgenerational, that go back to, 2,000 plus years into the past, probably a lot longer, then what? How do I thus take that information and make sense of what is this Canada that I'm born into, right? So for me, that was my journey. It took me a few years to start cutting through some Gordian knots, but it was with this idea that we're a nation that was never permitted to come into being. Like, every time we came close, there was something that cut our legs off or that broke our kneecaps in the race, and that put us back into a box, but then convinced us that the box has this great heroic narrative that we should be somehow emotionally attached to. That's sort of part of the hypnotic spell that's been infused into our school system, into our culture over the course of many generations before you and I were even born. This was already well developed, So in the 4-volume book series, you picked up volume 3 and 4 there. It's called The Untold History of Canada, and I tried to recast as best as I could the story in a better way than I think anybody had been able to do it up until now. From 1774, with the Quebec Act, which was volume 1, and why Canada failed the Ben Franklin Challenge, because Ben Franklin was up here. He was the founder of our Canada Postal Service. The first Canadian newspaper was all Benjamin Franklin, the guy who organized the founding fathers. And for me, like, that blew my mind when I
did not
discovered
know
that.
when you first. I heard this. You talking about
Yeah,
this. I don't know which episode I was watching, or what show I was
yeah,
watching, but I was like, "What? Benjamin Franklin was up here, and we could have had what America has." The First Amendment, the Republic, free from the
yeah.
king. Like, it sounds like paradise. What happened?
Well, it definitely would have been a lot better. Well, what happened was Ben Franklin walked into a Jesuitical Anglican intelligence trap that he didn't fully realize how bad it was. And it was only when he got up here, and at the time, Canada, it was Quebec. Quebec was a French colony, newly acquired through the gains of the 7 Years' War, right? So Britain came out of that process having largely defeated its rivals, its imperial rivals of Europe. That it was a global war, it was a world war, and we had a battle in North America. The French lost most of their possessions, and the colony of Quebec was a big one that the French lost. But there were still French speakers. The problem was they had a French culture, which was a feudalistic culture where the peasants, unlike the English speaking um, subjects in the other 13 colonies to the south, the Quebecois, the French, didn't have a culture of profound literacy. It was still frowned upon to allow your serfs to learn how to read. It was a much more enshrined oligarchical system. Now in France, they ended up kind of shaking off some of that. They have their own distortions after the mess that was the French Revolution in 1789 to 95, but they still like moved on a little bit. Whereas in Quebec, they didn't move on. It was kind of a time capsule. So Ben Franklin was expecting to find a little bit more of an educated, cultured citizenry like he had interfaced with in Philadelphia and Boston. Didn't get that. And on the one hand, he had a lot of sympathy. A lot of Quebecois loved the idea of freedom. They had a lot of resentment from the British Empire's abuses of them, but they didn't have the intellectual ability to really understand how to read Thomas Paine's Common Sense or these deeper philosophical treatises to teach you why liberty is something worth dying for.
Well,
Yeah.
like you said, they were kept away from literacy on purpose. Famously, Catholic priests didn't want the laity to read the Bible because they wanted
No.
to interpret it for them. So that
Yeah.
was kind of played into it. So they probably didn't even know much about Voltaire and what was going on in France at the time.
No, they had no idea. And
No.
and like you said, so that my answer there was just sort of half the answer, which is like the populist problem. The population didn't have the fortitude, but then, like you just alluded to, this was designed from the top as an organizational decision by the Jesuitical iron fist that was managing, the whole Catholic architecture from the top. Now the Jesuits, for anybody who's looked into it, this is I would say, it's a pretty Gnostic, and I would even say satanic order from the inside. Though you have good people who are Jesuits at the lower orders, I think the higher you get up the chain of command, you start seeing something that is a little bit Masonic.
Kind of like a mirror image of Freemasonry.
Totally Masonic, yeah. There's a rite of initiation process. There's constant examination. There's a virtue that is imposed upon those who abrogate their sense of personal agency and sovereignty in order to replace their will with the wishes of the officials who are higher up in the hierarchical chain of command. So right there, you have people who are trained to lose themselves to become automatons in order to get into heaven, and do something that they don't to basically become the instrument for another. And by the time you actually rise to the top, I think you've totally lost whatever sense of humanity that you have. And the Jesuits were firmly in control and had a sort of devil's pact with the Anglican intelligentsia that came in a controlling way when Britain won. Right now, the thing about the Anglicans is that they were created in the same year the Jesuits were created, in 1534. You had both Henry VIII was induced by Thomas Cromwell, who was an assistant to a Venetian banker, to create his new church with himself as the head of the church. That was the Anglican.
The English Pope.
The English Pope, yeah, that's and today King Charles, right, the third is still the head of the Church of England. That's just some weird configuration. That same year, 1834, was the same year that Ignatius Loyola was officially granted permission to set up his order. And now it was only officially turned into a papally recognized order in 1540, but it was in 1534 that it was created. And even this had a Venetian, which has a big role to play in my book series, but the Venetian hand of grand strategists were behind both of these things as a gang counter gang operation, both controlled for the same purpose, but with different flavors of the same thing. And that's Canada.
Can I interject this one point here? No, I've heard a lot of people talk about the founding of Venice and how weird it was and stuff.
Yeah.
I've always been kind of like in the back of my mind thinking about, okay, you have the Phoenicians, the Phoenicians, who even the Greeks credit with giving them their language, their alphabet, and that's why everything is phonics. The Phoenicians from the ancient times. But there seems to be a correlation between the Phoenicians and the Venetians. They're both seafaring powers, right, and stuff like that. Did they have the same kind of structure? And now we're going to get into the weeds about talking about the 1,000 years of missing history. Maybe the Phoenicians just folded into the Venetians, but the whole idea was that, and maritime law comes out of that, is that there's something happened, some kind of reset, some kind of cataclysm or whatever, and these seafaring peoples kind of took over and used their international maritime law to infiltrate and kind of like undermine other people's sovereignty, and it's been going on for quite a while.
I had a feeling you were a context guy. That's cool. All right. Yeah, man. Okay, so I think it's highly likely that there's a direct, that it's not a coincidence that the Phoenicians and the later Venetians have a similar sound. I think that there's, and as you pointed out, both are maritime empires. Well, the Phoenicians might not have been so much of an empire, but the point being is they definitely had imperial proclivities, and certainly you had certain. I mean, when you look at Carthage, there was a good and a bad component to Carthage and Tyre and the whole like Phoenician economy.
Yes.
You know, it seems like you had a city builder faction that represented something authentically good, that saw a virtue in avoiding war and creating economic opportunities,
And
looking
trading.
for trading, as the basis of interaction with other cultures instead of like looting and stealing and going to war. So there's this good thing, and this was, I think you could really call it the city builder faction. But then you had this high level mystery cult faction, which was sort of what I sort of think of it. And I got this idea through studying the writings of Mr. Lyndon LaRouche over many years, who I greatly respected, and his insights gave me a handle on this that I like, which is that this mystery cult faction could be considered a Dark Age faction. They're in opposition ideologically to the city builder tradition of humanity, which is manifested in most cultures in different ways and different flavors, but it's the same essential thing, right? Those who see human beings as potential, as divine potential to be assisted in our awakening to become sovereign agencies, walking as living image of the Creator, which requires some, assistance culturally, economically. You know, you can't do that if you're starving, and if you're at war, it's a lot harder. Versus those who actually see human beings to be made in the image of mud,
Yeah.
to be controlled by a master class, born to rule over their slaves, right? So there's the two things, and I think in Tyre and in the Phoenician system, there was I could see clearly that those battle lines drawn, and I think when Rome, there was a certain decision made at a certain point, and I don't know all the, I mean, I wasn't there, but I'm trying to glean into as much as I can some of this. It seems like Rome was targeted early on. I think Rome and Carthage had a strategic bond for about 250 years. So the Roman, before Rome became an empire, they were still
That's
a
right.
republic.
When Rome was a republic, when they're early on of the republic, they actually cooperated with the Carthaginians and had peace treaties.
Yeah, like for over 200 years. It was a significant thing. So I think that the sites were set. So there were three Carthaginian wars. And I think I've read Cicero, and I like his assessment, and I like St. Augustine's assessment in The City of God, where both men, in the case of Cicero, it's in his Commonwealth, and in The City of God by Augustine, it's in his it's in The City of God. They're both trying to do a diagnostic about, like, when did Rome go crazy, like when did it lose its soul, and both of them identify the choice that was made to backstab Carthage and to start to focus on undoing its alliance, because together they were fighting against the Persian Empire, against those major evil forces that were trying to create what the Babylonian Empire failed to do, which was a total hegemonic structure of control over a depopulated warring society under a high priesthood of an elite, blah blah blah, right? So that's what Carthage and Rome successfully fought against for a while. But then when Rome started stabbing its ally in the back, they started losing their soul. Kind of like the U.S. going into accepting the idea of going into supporting the British Empire in keeping their colonies after World War II by going into Vietnam
It'll
and
almost be like 18. I kind of,
yeah.
I target the time when America started to lose its soul when it went to war with Cuba, with the Spanish Empire, and took over Cuba, and they used the sinking of the Maine and
Mm.
the whole false flag behind that, and then they became an imperial nation, something that the founding fathers told them not to do.
Yeah,
And
good point, man.
yeah,
Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, you can even go to the Mexican Empire, the Mexican War too, which,
true, true.
Lincoln and John Quincy Adams fought against that war. But, like Mexico is a republic. And as a republic that had fought against the Spanish Empire to become a republic,
Yeah,
they still chose to go and subdue them and make them their satrap over a lot of blood. So you're right. I mean, there's all of these points where the U.S. was teetering and following in the path of Rome, but there was still more vitality to reestablish the principles of the founding fathers. And I think it's the same thing in the first Punic War. Was it like 250 or so BC? There was still more vitality to go back to the principles of what Brutus was trying to do when he overthrew the monarchical system of Tarquin. And Tarquin is a
yeah.
pretty nasty guy, and create the republic. But at that time, you had the first, then you had the second, and then the third. The third and final Carthaginian War was where Carthage was wiped out. Every man and child was killed. All the women were put into slavery. They wiped it out, and then they sort of embraced their destiny as the new empire. And at that time, these mystery cults brought in from Persia via Anatolia were established. You had the cult of Isis brought in 200 with the Second Punic War. The cult of Cybele Attis,
Yeah.
which is a mystery religion, a very high level, brought in again via Anatolia, and Phrygia, which is where the Phrygian cap comes from, and that was also brought in amidst the Second Punic War, and then finally after the first Punic War, the Third Punic War is finished, then the cult of Mithra began to become established. So these major mystery cults that were always designed to organize society, kind of like precursors to the Rosicrucians and the modern Scottish Rite. That's kind of how it was done back then too.
And the glorification of war.
Oh yeah, well the Mithra cult was a warrior cult. Every legionnaire, every Praetorian Guard member had to be an initiate, just to keep your status.
Yeah.
And the thing was satanic. I mean, ultimately, it was about merging the sacred and the profane in a series of rituals that would become one. So it was a bad version of unify opposites in the heart and mind of an initiate that would go through all sorts of, trauma-based mind control. Psychedelic drugs were helpful to break them down and depattern them, kind of like what they did in MK Ultra was not new, right? So
Exactly.
that's sort of the way the whole thing was organized. You had we can go into a lot of that, but all I have to say that's what defined the character of the Roman Empire. That's what Christianity largely overthrew. Like the actual core driving force of Jesus's movement was heavily resistant to this pagan hedonistic immorality that was the norm that everyone was expected to abide by. And the empire just spread itself too thin. They couldn't crush the flames of Christianity as much as they tried. They couldn't do it. And the thing kind of just broke down under its own self-contradictions, just built on top of each other. And it took a few hundred years. But the ruling families didn't disappear. They kind of remigrated. Some stayed in Rome, and you still have these nasty palazzos representing old power. I just came back from Rome with my wife a few weeks ago. We were there. And you can just feel the old power. There's a lot of beauty too. There's good things in Rome as well, but there's a lot of this other thing that's very clearly evil.
Brutalism.
And some of
kind of a brutalism that kind of overshadows everything.
Yeah, it's kind of everywhere. And then on the other hand, then a bunch of them migrated so some stayed back in Rome, some went to Venice, some went to Amalfi. Some of the ruling families went to Constantinople, but most of them, I think, the most virulent ones organized themselves in Amalfi and in Venice and reconstituted their power as new empires, in starting the 9th century in a serious way. And by the 12th century, 13th century, really with the Fourth Crusade, was where Venice totally established itself. They got rid of their rivals, Amalfi. They got rid of. I mean, it's like the oligarchy will cooperate amongst the families to a certain extent, but they will also, backstab each other at opportune moments as well. And that's sort of it's gangland logic, right? On the map. Yeah.
Where the idea of the mafia comes from and all of that, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
And
So
even then, they cooperated. They will cooperate with you to a point, but where it comes to the bottom line and, well, how do I keep my dynasty going? They will do the underhanded thing, and it's almost guaranteed. So let's bring this back to Canada. The founding of Canada, like you were talking about in your, we'll get back to the Quebec thing. So let's go to your volume 2. After the Benjamin Franklin comes up here, tries to do what he does, but Canada goes along to the Royalists, and they're definitely an extension of the British Commonwealth. So after the American Revolution, and all these loyalists come up to Canada from the United States, and they constitute in opposition to what America is. And there are good things and bad things about America. The great thing about America, of course, is the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, freedom, liberty, equality, sort of like the French. But there's also a dark side to what America is doing, because they allow slavery still. And that becomes a moralistic point where Canada can lord it over the States. At least we don't have slavery, because the British Empire, famous in 1835, got rid of slavery and even had the British Navy go out and stop it on the high seas at gunpoint. So do you think Canada's idea of being morally superior to America dates back to then?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think so. Like this is part of the Achilles heel in America, was always this very loud contradiction that everyone could see except for Americans. Or I mean, not all. I mean, a lot of Americans could see it, and they despise the institution of slavery. But a lot of them were so addicted to the benefits that were accrued by having free labor working for you and getting a lot of money. So yeah, they were willfully blind, like Jefferson, right? Jefferson had at his best moments, he did good things, but the guy had 200 slaves. He was the biggest plantation owner at the time in Virginia. He didn't do anything to free his slaves even after he died. So he didn't seem to have a problem with the paradox of his ideal that all men are created in the image of God, that inalienable rights are inherent in all people, life, liberty, and happiness, and yet still hold human slaves, chattel slavery. He didn't have that. He couldn't overcome that paradox, and he wasn't alone. So I think that the empire kind of recognized that was the weak spot in the armor to hit at. And one of the things that Aaron Burr played a big role in, as sort of the founding father of America's deep state in large measure, is he's the founding father of the Bank of Manhattan, that became the foundation of the entirety of Wall Street as a fifth column inside of America, representing the interests of the city of London in the United States. And that was what Aaron Burr always was. Now, one of the original ideas that he put into motion was in 1799 as a secessionist plot to cause the free states that had let go of slavery to become their own confederation, united or even joined up with the British possessions of Quebec and the Maritimes, while the slave power of the South that still had slavery was going to become their own confederation. But yet both of them were going to have a special relationship with the British Empire. And this was prevented by really he would have gotten it. He was the vice president under Jefferson. He was making a maneuver before he was Jefferson's vice president. He was going to become the president, and he almost did. And it was just because you had Alexander Hamilton, who put his all into getting his rival Jefferson, who Hamilton and Jefferson didn't like each other, but Hamilton recognized that Jefferson at least was not a traitor. Although he was a hypocrite, it was better to have him than Burr, and he gave his all to get Jefferson in. as president, and they won like by 1 vote. It was crazy close. But then that disrupted Burr's first plan to do his secessionist plot, up, to basically rejoin the British Empire and undo 1776. So then Burr had to do it again, which he tried in 1804. And this time he had to become governor of New York State, the most powerful economic state of the Union, in order to achieve his second attempt. And again, he failed only because Alexander Hamilton once again jumped in, did everything to stop Burr from becoming the governor. And then his plan didn't work out, couldn't break it up. But he tried, after killing Hamilton, he was a little bit more free and tried it a third time. And this is all in my book in volume, this is in volume 1 of Clash of the Two Americas. And my friend Jerry Theriang, who's a great historian who taught me a lot, did amazing work on this stuff. There was a third attempt in 1807 when Aaron Burr tried a third time, but now using the Western territories that had just been purchased by Napoleon, to use one of his assets, Colonel Wilkerson, who was installed as the governor of the Northwest Territories, to essentially create a paramilitary army with British troops, American volunteers that would go and declare war unilaterally outside of the White House, outside of the chain of command, that would declare war on Spain, on Florida and New Orleans, and then take that new power and then kill Jefferson and install Burr as the emperor of a new sort of North American operation. Now, that was a plot that there was a whistleblower who was playing along, who was a senator. I'm forgetting his name. It's in my book, Clash of the Two Americas, Volume 1, who went to Jefferson, went to the Congress and said, hey, by the way, there's this conspiracy by Burr to kill you and to establish an empire with the help of the British Empire. And there was a trial, and they didn't have enough at the time. They didn't have enough hard evidence, so he was able to be acquitted. However, there was enough awareness by the population of what Burr was that he had to still escape. Every time he left his house, he got egged. He got tomatoes thrown at him, so he had to end up leaving in disguise to Canada, where his nephew-in-law was the Governor General of Quebec. His forgetting his name all of a sudden, it'll come to me later, and gave him letters to go to England, where he lived with Jeremy Bentham in Jeremy Bentham's house for 5 years, while the British Empire was trying to figure out how can they initiate what became the War of 1812 to recapture America militarily. And it was only a week before the War of 1812 was launched that Burr was brought back into the United States, and there were letters between him and the British ambassador to the United States, Anthony Merry, which have been preserved. They were only discovered like decades later, so they didn't have it in trial. Otherwise, he would have gone to jail and probably would have hung as a traitor. And Anthony Merry is writing to the British Foreign Office, Bentham, saying that Aaron Burr has just given us his full service. He is no longer satisfied with his role as vice president and wants to give us his full service, and we can use him. And these letters are going back and forth from the British Foreign Office to Anthony Merry. Burr is then overseeing the Hartford Convention to again break up the Union through the slave state and free state dichotomy in 1814. This is done by what is then the northern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite, which is saying, oh yeah, we're the free people. We want to clean our hands of the institution of slavery. But it's like they don't want to stop slavery. They just want to break the Constitution and declare a new country, a new confederation, as part of the British Empire, while the slave power represented by the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite, both of which are overseen by the United Grand Lodge of England. Both of them are branches of that, set up by British intelligence during the American Revolution.
That is really incredible. Yeah. I've always wondered about that dichotomy, because the northern Freemasons were abolitionists and the southern Freemasons were pro-slavery at the same time.
Yeah, they're both united in their common desire to break up the Union and undo the Constitution. That was their common. And that was what it was gang counter gang, right? It's totally it's the way the
That's why
false
there
left
was
right
that big
opposition.
anti-Masonic league that happened in the 1800s. I forget. I think it was John Quincy Adams who really railed against the mechanizations of the Freemasons. Some incredible stuff was going on then, and nowadays nobody talks about it.
I got something crazy on that. So
Okay.
check this out, okay? There's a so I recently published a trilogy of books. Over the course, this is volume 3, Revenge of the Mystery Cults,
Oh,
Edgar Poe's
cool.
final mystery. Yeah, and in it, I got a chapter 6 on the Mormon purge of Republican Freemasonry, and what this my research took me down a weird, unexpected rabbit hole on this point, and I've come to the conclusion that the anti-Masonic movement was actually a Masonic operation to purge the Republican lodges in America, the Ben Franklin, Washington, Hamilton lodges. Henry Clay, was a key figure that kept America alive and stopped the Hartford Convention and stopped the British Empire during the War of 1812. His lodges were destroyed, and like coming out of that 20-year program of the only lodges that survived and dominated after 1840, when the anti-Masonic movement sort of petered out, was the Scottish Rite. All of the other branches of Freemasonry were wiped out, and Albert Pike, as well as I forget the Grand Master of the Northern Branch, both of them celebrate in their writings the anti-Masonic movement as the greatest gift to Freemasonry.
Well, that's sort of like the CIA going into Mexico and favoring one cartel over another and directing who takes charge of the drug trade.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's the same thing totally. Yeah, and I think that John Quincy Adams, because I have
You have too many books, man.
I got a lot of books, dude. I've got John Quincy Adams' writings on Freemason. Now, the thing that I noticed in doing that is that there's no original writings by John Quincy Adams on anti-Freemasonry. All of it comes from his grandson, who says that he transcribed his grandfather's messages about or remarks about Freemasonry. But it seems like, because John Quincy's sons and grandsons all sort of joined the Scottish Rite Satan. They all became Satanists. All of them kind of like, they did not keep the family tradition going. They were not honest people. They were all part of the Eastern establishment in a bad way.
Okay.
So I think that they created a sort of myth. And even what's his name, William Morgan, the guy who mythically died in 1825 when he was going to expose the secrets of Freemasonry.
Right. He was supposedly drowned in a creek or something, in a river.
Yeah, no evidence of any of that. In fact, they never found a body. What they did find, though, is that his wife, immediately when he disappears, his wife becomes one of the 19 wives of Joseph Smith.
Brigham Young? Joseph Smith.
Okay. Yeah. And so of all the people you would marry, you married Joseph Smith, that had just been recently established, right, as a secessionist cult in America. They had 3 civil wars before the U.S. Civil War. There were 3 civil wars that the Mormons had run to create their own sort of separate state.
I've always thought that the Mormons were a Freemason cutout, or because Joseph Smith and the whole legend of finding the plates. And there is something to the fact that he found some ancient artifacts that might have connected America to some ancient, like the Phoenicians. They famously found some Phoenician writing on a statue in Virginia or something, on some kind of old lighthouse. So there might be some. He found some of these old connections, and no matter how tenuous they may be, with something like that, you can develop a mystery religion around it, where only the elect can come see the magic stuff that you have hiding from everybody else, and if you got enough money behind it, and you got enough influence behind it, you can create a whole new religion out of it. And I think the Freemason idea is they do that over and over again. Jehovah's Witnesses, another one. Scientology, another one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Seventh-day Adventists. Yeah, exactly. You have the Swedenborgians, you got the Seventh-day Adventists, you got the Church of Jesus Christ Scientists. All of these things, they spin them, and they spin them as little sub branches in splinter groups, with different flavors. But yeah, I think the thing with the Mormon, like even now in Salt Lake City, if you look at their big temples, you got a weird hierarchical structure where it's only, I think, if you're at one of the 144,000, there's like 144,000 places that are
Yeah,
reserved for the elect,
right.
and there's like certain things that are very common to the Jehovah's Witnesses too.
Yeah,
Um, and you got like the Eye of Horus, the all-seeing eye, baked right into their temple. You got a
yeah,
lot of Freemasonic rituals that were literally transplanted from William Morgan's published book into Joseph Smith's recorded rituals that he baked into his own system. It's taken direct. It's lifted. I actually quote from.
yeah.
I got 2 pages comparing Joseph Smith and William Morgan's treatments of Freemasonic rituals. It's the same thing.
When I
Um,
read the Book of Mormon when I was 16 years old, I read the Book
yeah.
of Mormon because we had some Mormon missionaries down the house, and they come over and play basketball with me because Mormons from Utah love playing basketball. So we'd play basketball, and they
Yeah.
started trying to get me into this. And so I let them in the house one day. They gave me the Book of Mormon to keep. We talked about it and all this stuff, and I always kind of, you know, and I started realizing that the Book of Mormon and the Bible, right? Whoever decided to put the Book of Mormon together wasn't one guy. It wasn't the angel Moroni.
Mm,
It was a crew of people that
mm,
poured through the Bible and tried to transpose as much of the Bible to the Mormon book as you can. So they were almost identical. So you could look at what happened in the New Testament with Jesus, happened in the New Testament with Layman, and it was like, oh my God,
mm,
right? And like Ham is cursed because he's a and becomes a drawer of wood and a servant for the rest of his life. And they have the same
mm,
thing in the Mormon Bible, so they can justify subduing the natives and making them lesser humans than themselves.
mm.
To justify ethnic cleansing. It's the same thing. And I was like, wow, this is pretty impressive. So I started thinking. Even then, I was going, "There's no way this was this. This looks like it was a complete operation." And I
Yeah,
always wondered about that.
yeah, man. Like my wife, she just published a book. It's called "The Shaping of a World Religion,"
Oh, cool.
from Jesuits, Freemasons, and anthropologists to the ghost dance religion. And in this, she really nails the Mormons as being a key factor in the controlled annihilation of many of the native bands that were
Yeah,
induced to go into the this particular cult that involved the ghost dance around a messianic prophet figure who himself appeared to have been the Shawnee prophet, and there was a
right.
few others.
But he,
uh
he was a Christian also. He got the Ghost Dance Prophet was he imported Christian ideas to the native religion, and it became this whole thing. And you have to wonder, that was another op. It was another psyop
it
used
seems like
against the natives to justify destroying them and bred
it's and
the
get them to
battle
do
wounded knee.
and get them to do it themselves. And that
Yeah,
was part of the idea, was that I think it was understood that they were being lied to, that if you wear these special shirts, you'll be invulnerable from bullets, so you could all run in full charge into the cavalry, and nothing will happen to you. It was known that they were going to self destruct, but they
yeah,
did it anyway. And at the same time, you had a bestialization of the American soldiers, who are
right.
also like induced to lose their own humanity and chase down the
Well,
natives in
they
some
were heavily
revanchist.
indoctrinated and panicked about these savages out there that, yeah, it was
Yeah.
incredible.
No, it's the same thing we're talking about, the slavery, anti-slavery operation. You get both the abolitionists, the radical abolitionists like the John Browns, to go and do like some terrorist maneuver, and then at the same time you just stoke the flames of the other side to go and do the opposite, and they love that. They love it. So that's the formula. That's the
Playing both
formula.
sides against the middle, the old
Yeah.
Roman, the old Roman way of doing things, divide and conquer. It's the oldest trick in the book, and people keep falling for it.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Exactly, and unfortunately, Canada plays not a great role in a lot of this stuff. Like,
Let's bring it back to Canada because I'd like to
yeah,
go
yeah,
back. Thank you.
sure. So that's the thing. Like, when you look at it, not only did we have the family compact that never went away. These oligarchical families, many of them are still here.
Yeah,
Even though they don't call themselves the family compact anymore, but they're still there. The Parkins family, there's many others. And
Would you align with the fact that people call them the Laurentian elites, or is that too loose of a term?
it's a loose term, but it's fine. Yeah, that's one aspect of it. But in the context of my book series, and you'll get that in volume 2 and in volume 4 of the Untold History of Canada, like Montreal, Canada played a key role in murdering Lincoln. Like that was a Confederate hub, which the British.
Wasn't that secret society, the Knights of St. Cross or something? What did they call themselves?
Oh, you mean the Knights of the Golden Circle?
Yes, yes, and they
Yeah.
had their hub was Montreal, right?
Oh yeah. George Saunders. Yeah, that's there you go. Yeah, that one tackles more the roundtable movement, Cecil Rhodes's roundtable movement, and volume 2 goes a little bit more into the Confederate operations in the Civil War. But yeah, like that was the role largely, even though the Canadian population was pro-Lincoln by and large. They were pro, and Lincoln didn't fall into the trap of being like an abolitionist, or he didn't play that game of dichotomies. Neither did Frederick Douglass. But that's why they were so despised and had to be murdered, was because, especially Lincoln, had to be murdered because he wasn't playing into the trap. But his murderer, Wilkes Booth, was deployed from Montreal, Canada, which he was here, and there was a bunch of anarchist communes all throughout Ontario, Buffalo, Quebec, that was kind of, creating assassins. And that was one of his experiences, was being sent down from Montreal, and he might have lived. I mean, they say they killed him and burned his body in a barn, but there was never any evidence that his body was ever found. So all that to say,
My name is Mud.
Hmm?
My name is Mud. It's said that he survived. And he took the name of Mud and lived a long life in Kentucky or something. And everybody said that he had a whip and all that. And his last name was Mudd, Mudd. And there's a lot of speculation that
Yeah.
for service well performed, the intelligence agencies made sure that he lived a nice long life. Sort of like maybe Epstein never really was murdered in that jail, right? And he's been spirited away to this, Anyway, we'll go back to what you were saying.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely, we're both conspiratorially minded. Yes, I concur. So all that to say,
Pattern
Canada's.
recognition specialist.
Yeah, exactly. So, like whether it was that or whether it was JFK's murder, which again, as Jim Garrison proved in his On the Trail of the Assassins, the former district attorney of New Orleans demonstrated very conclusively that murder was carried out largely through British intelligence operations in Permindex in Montreal, that oversaw the very, very multifaceted operation that killed JFK. That was Louis Mortimer Bloomfield, a close associate of Maurice Strong, a Canadian oligarch who created
The Club
pretty
of
much the
Rome.
Green New Deal. The club. Well, he was a founder of the Canadian Club of Rome. Yeah, this guy was everywhere. Bilderberger steering committee kind of guy. Sort of the Mark Carney. I guess spirit father of Mark Carney.
Yes.
So that's this disturbing part of Canada. Now the positive side is this volume 3. So you picked up volume 3, the Canada's fight for progress, or the forgotten struggle for progress. Yeah, and that I tried to tell a bit more of the optimistic side, because you can get a little demoralized sometimes looking at this sad story that is Canada, and I felt I needed some light to sort of counteract the darkness. So I started focusing my mind on just looking for where are the good guys? So where do we have the heroes that were able to stand up and amidst this absurd shadow government structure of empire that is Canada, and do good and create something better for the future. And so, I outlined several chapters in there featuring some of the forgotten stories of W.A.C. Bennett, of John Diefenbaker. What were the battles that they were waging against this Malthusian anti-humanist class of oligarchs that was trying to undo all of the good ideas that they fought for. And they did get things done, but there was a lot that they didn't get done because of sabotage, not because they were incompetent, but because of sabotage. Daniel Johnson Sr., the Premier of Quebec, also plays a prominent role with Charles de Gaulle, his very close friend, and Bobby Kennedy, another. Ironically, three men who were all like the good Catholics, the solid Catholics, were all working together in the '60s to fight this oligarchy in their own way and doing it together. So that story is also told in 2 of the chapters. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff to get inspired by.
Well, like Bob Marley says, how long shall they kill our prophets while we stand beside and watch or look? And there's always the prophets that come along, but they never get enough people behind them to effectuate change before they're caught up to by the powers that ought not be. And it's kind of sad, but at least there is some hope, and there is a way forward. Now, I like your idea of getting rid of the monarchy. I'm a Republican like you are. I have since high school, I said, why the hell is our country led by, even if it's symbolic, the king and a governor general that the prime minister has to go beg to prorogue parliament or call an election? And why can the party that's in power choose to call the election when they want to, when it's in their favor? It's always driven me nuts that we don't have more of an American style Republican system, because that seems more fair. Now, I know oligarchs can still control the American style election system, and then and if you introduce like money into it and billionaires controlling, the funding of the Congress and all that, it becomes a shit show in itself. But still, I would rather have an elected Senate. I'd rather have an executive branch that doesn't have to beg to a foreign power to call an election. It's all been weird to me. Do you think there's any hope that we could ever throw off the shackles of monarchy and become a nation unto ourselves, sovereign?
Yeah, I think at some point we have to. I mean, I don't see, it's not sustainable to live in this weird Byzantine fake pseudo country with a hereditary elite that hates us, like managing the show.
Yeah.
It's either it's going to get really dark for a number of generations, or we're going to get our heads out of our asses and create something that is fit to survive, which has to have some characteristic of what you just described, of some form of representative government where people are citizens and not simply subjects that are obedient. That has to be there.
And then you tie it in with the fact that we have this monarchical system that seems to be going along with this World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, UN Agenda, Sustainable Agenda 2030. We have King Charles gets his Bentley flight over to Davos so he can drive his Bentley to the WF Climate Change Council, and he sits there talking in his Malthusian way. Famously, of course, Prince Philip said that he'd like to come back as a virus to wipe out the unspeakable plebs. But
yeah,
we have that connection. The monarchy of Britain famously became an empire on their own, right? But now they've been absorbed into this this whole new world order system.
Yeah.
Where does this fit in what Trump's trying to do with his tariffs and everything? His instincts are good? Maybe he's actually listening to some people that say we got to get rid of this idea. Look what they did with COVID, of course, famously. We have to stand up and reclaim our sovereignty. But the problem is he's got a lot of rhinos. He's got a lot of people that represent what's going on in Israel, and this whole idea of the neocons and the domination of the new American century. Can he get it done what he wants to do? His instincts are good, but there's too many people going to throw some bear traps in his way.
I don't know. I mean, just a word before we talk about Trump and whether he's able to get this done. On what you were saying about the monarchy and this whole New World Order agenda, like Mark Carney played a organizing role in the Council on Inclusive Capitalism with the Vatican, overseen by Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, sponsored by King Charles III. He's very, very close. King Charles III and his father, Prince Philip Mountbatten. These guys they were both presidents of the World Wildlife Fund. Prince Philip was the president of the World Wildlife Fund while Maurice Strong was his vice president in the 1970s, and before Maurice Strong took the role of vice president, the guy who was formerly vice president of the World Wildlife Fund for Nature under Prince Philip was none other than Louis Mortimer Bloomfield, the guy who oversaw Permindex that Jim Garrison identified as the key assassination bureau that tried to kill de Gaulle, that did kill JFK. That same guy that headed it went on to become the vice president of the World Wildlife Fund, which
How
was
do you keep all these connections in your head?
I'm like, I'm at war, man. I gotta have my bullets. So, and it's like this itself was co-created. The World Wildlife Fund was created by Prince Philip and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. These two hereditary monarchs. Prince Bernhard was the guy who created the Bilderberger Group that Maurice Strong was a part of, that Mark Carney is a steering committee member, that Peter Thiel actually was a steering committee member, and I think still is, which doesn't give me any optimism when I look at some of the power structures that have chosen to try to co-opt or influence MAGA at this point. A lot of them are transhumanists and tied to that very same Gnostic, thing that's been there orchestrating crusades 1,000 years ago. It's the same Opus Dei, Knight of Malta operation.
And it reflects the name of the Oracle, right? That Oracle group that wants to, that Trump famously brought these guys in, the Oracle. I forget, what's the name of the Oracle guy? Larry whatever?
Yeah, not Larry Fick. He's the BlackRock. But yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, the mRNA guys that want to like create
$500 billion investment on mRNA so we can we'll use digital ID, artificial intelligence to tell whether you have cancer and construct a vaccine that will save you from cancer within 24 hours and all this stuff. And he's got these guys in there, and I'm going, what does this have to do about making America great again? What does this have to do about? And of course, famously, Trump was Operation Warp Speed. Famously, he won't back down. He keeps saying that the vaccine saved millions of lives, and we know that's not true. So you have to wonder how compromised is he, and especially with Israel, what's going on there. I mean, Miriam Adelson famously gave him $50 million. Netanyahu comes over and Trump pulls out the chair for him to sit down and then puts the chair in behind him. Like, who's really running things here?
I'm prepared. I'm still holding out a little bit of hope that this is deflection, that he's playing, a game. I liked a lot of what he did in the first term, and that's largely what's informed
a lot of what he tried to do in the first term. And I really thought the Russiagate thing was a real thing to try to keep him from ending a war, right? Or whatever. So when he got back, and a lot of people said, well, once he's done forever, whatever. But I knew he was going to get back in. I had this feeling. I said, I think this is all being crafted for him to return. And then he's going to have a huge popular support for what he's doing because it's going to look good from the outside. For instance, Doge, we're going to go after the inefficiencies in government and blah, blah, blah. But they don't go to where they get the most inefficiency out of the government. They don't go across the Potomac, as Steve Bannon famously said to the Pentagon. Right, they're going after Social Security, all this low-hanging fruit. Sure, there's lots of, and U.S. aid. Sure, there's lots of stuff to cut there. There's a lot of waste, and he's actually, in a good way, brought to the light through transparency, like sunlight is the best disinfectant. About all the U.S. aid being involved in regime change operations, they do things the CIA can't even get away with. So that's one good thing. But on the other thing, they're really so that's kind of like, here's a shining keys for us to follow. But on the other hand, what's really going on with this Mideast and what's going on in Iran, the war in Ukraine isn't over yet. Remember, he said he was going to end it with a phone call first day. Still going on.
Yeah. He also said, he said in an interview not that long ago that one of his top priorities will be to break up the Russia-China alliance. And he said, I think I'm the man to do it. He just came out and said it. I think it was Tucker Carlson. And I think that's what I'm seeing, sort of too much of a
triangulation
where there seems to be a harmonized intention amongst powers that are made to appear on the surface to be at odds with each other. And here I would refer to, the European Union, Canada, the Commonwealth, and the USA under Trump, there's currently, if you were going to try to do everything possible to weaken the Russia-China alliance, which is sort of the foundation of the bricks of the multipolar alliance, if you were going to do that, you would do it exactly the way it's happening right now. Is, you would try to charm as much as you can Russia and say, like, we're going to go back to 2002 when we still had our honeymoon, and Putin was making offers to join NATO. We'll try to pretend we're a new thing, as long as, and at the same time, we're going to start attacking China like crazy, economically as well as militarily. There's 158,000 U.S. troops around China's perimeter. There's like 78 U.S. military bases running war games. That hasn't stopped despite Trump's crackdown, and I'm happy he's doing it on U.S. aid and freezing the NED. I'm glad that's happening. But despite that, I just came back from Thailand, and I was told by many people who are institutional operators within East Asia that they're seeing no reduction at all of those operations on the Asia Pacific front. So they're still very, very, very concerned that there is.
Yeah. And Trump just came out and said, we're going to raise the Pentagon's budget to $1 trillion, he said. We're going to be peace through strength, the Ronald Reagan thing.
Yeah, so you got that, and then you have, on the other hand, the EU, you got Carney, who are putting on a charm offensive to try to tell China, hey, look, big bad America's hurting all of us. We're all in this together. Let's build some relationships. And I think that that's a bit of a dangerous honey trap. I think that China is too smart to fall for this, but I think that they recognize the evil that Justin Trudeau represented when China basically said, screw your US-Canada or Canada-China free trade agreement in 2017. And it was a beautiful, embarrassing event when Justin got off the plane in Beijing thinking he was going to sign this long-awaited deal, and China basically stiffed him. Nobody showed up to the plane, and he had to leave the same day, embarrassed. Wow. And that was basically China giving a direct message saying, look, we know what British Canada is, and we're not going to fall for that, which was good because they recognize that a more reliable partner is Russia. And, part of the free trade agreement then would have been like, okay, we'll give you hugely advantageous access to abundant resources in Canada. And, while you get addicted to the Canadian resources that will make easy and accessible and cheap for you, cheaper than even Russia, as you become more dependent on us, then we can close the taps when we want to. And when I say we, I mean the British Empire. I don't even mean Canada.
Yeah.
So
we're still part of the Commonwealth, basically, right? Australia, New Zealand, the Five Eyes, whatever.
Yeah.
Joined at the hip with the American Empire.
Yeah. And then you got, Trump saying to King Charles, like, joining the Commonwealth sounds like a great idea as an associate member, right? I'm like, well, what the so.
And the whole idea of Canada becoming the 51st state, Greenland, Panama Canal, and I'm thinking that sounds like the technocratic plan they had to make a North American Union.
Put
us all under one currency.
It looks a little bit too similar to that, and it's helped out Mark Carney quite a bit. I think if he hadn't said that, we could have easily have had it would have been a lot easier to defeat Mark Carney's what looks like Mark Carney. It looks like he's going to take it. I think that unfortunately there's not a lot of going on to stop Mark Carney. I mean, I love the People's Party. Don't get me wrong, and I want to get some MPs in there from the People's Party. Yeah, I want you to win. But that being said, like the institutional power and also the hysterics amongst Ontarians and Quebecois, but Canada as a whole, there's so many people, except for maybe Alberta, but there's so many Canadians who are all hearing 51st state, American imperialism, jingoism, and they're all going. They're going crazy, and there's this
emotionally, almost like they're primed. So they've been trained. Yeah. They've been trained this way since birth. We are the moralistic nation. America is bad. Look what's going on. It's like it's being played out right in front of their eyes, and they're like trained seals. Like, it's embarrassing.
It's
when they boo the American national anthem and the Toronto Maple Leafs boo the American national anthem, I'm thinking Austin Matthews is an American and he's their best player. What's he thinking?
That's hilarious.
And of course, in this whole crazy thing that Russia is the enemy, I don't want to get into the Ukraine-Russian war and applauding Nazis. We're running at an hour here. We could do this for 4 hours. But the whole idea of hating Russia, but if you took the Russians off your favorite hockey team, if you took the Russians off that favorite hockey team of yours, they'd be nothing. Your goal, they're all the best goalies are all Russian. Ovechkin just broke Gretzky's record. He's a Russian. The whole thing is just insane. We're expected to believe that Putin is like Stalin, but he allows his greatest athletes to go willy-nilly around the globe making capitalistic money. and he got rid of communism. He's a capitalist. He might be an oligarch in his own right, and he's got his own favorite oligarchs. But famously, when after about 3 years when he's in power, he decided to crack down on certain people in Russia who, under the American system, had kind of like gone ape shit and started owning everything. He said, from now on, you're not going to be earning money here and spending it and sending it overseas. You got to invest back in Russia because you're a Russian. And so like four or five of the billionaire oligarchs said, fuck this, and left and went to the city of London. One of them, Abramovich, went and bought the Chelsea Football Club, which was crazy. But the oligarchs that decided to stay in Russia are nationalists. They love their country. And when of course, when Russia was provoked, and read Scott Horton's book, Provoked, when they were provoked to invade Ukraine, and the sanctions were put on Russia, they became stronger because they're investing in their industry, in their manufacturing, and they're making a strong working class base. They've become the America of the 1950s all of a sudden. It's crazy to watch. And I'm thinking, oh my God, it's the year 2025. When are we going to get past this idea of war? When are we going to get past this idea of bullying other countries through armaments? The military-industrial complex has gone so crazy that they've not just infected America, but they've infected Europe. Now Europe's starting to want to do a military buildup to fight Putin because they think Putin's going to invade Denmark tomorrow. It's just crazy. This whole collective insanity. And I thought, with these, Russia's nuclear weapons, China's nuclear weapons, America's nuclear weapons, Pakistan nuclear weapons. Why are we doing this? I mean, the doomsday clock has never been closer to 12. I remember growing up, we were warned constantly in public service announcements in our popular culture that's the last thing we want is a nuclear war. JFK famously and Khrushchev famously came together and stopped one over the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they were applauded and they were heroes. But now all of a sudden, if you mention, hey, maybe you don't want to start a nuclear war by supporting Ukraine, you go, well, what are you, Putin's puppet? It's just insane. Do you think can we get away from the brink of nuclear war at least? What is your take on that, Matt?
I hope so.
Sorry.
No, dude. I really hope so. Like. I see that there are adults in the room, and that gives me hope. Like, if it wasn't for the leadership in Russia, and I would say also China, and Russia and China have a very strategic bond of survival, but I see adults that are mature statesmen, the types of which we haven't seen in the West in a very long time. And I'm hoping that Trump has something authentic inside of him that is, building up, that has back channels coordinating with Russia and Xi Jinping, and hopefully there's some method behind the madness. I wouldn't bet on it, but I hope I'm not discounting that.
You still got the hopium there.
Hey.
Remember famously just a few months ago, like 2 weeks after he was elected, he said, I think we should talk to Putin and Xi Jinping, and we should all reduce our military budget by 50%, all of us. And I was going, that's brilliant. And then the next thing you know, he's raising the Pentagon budget to $1 trillion. Don Jeffries, a frequent guest of mine, Don Jeffries, author of many books, Masking the Truth. I have one of my favorite books of his, but he also writes about American, the John F. Kennedy assassination really was his foundation, and he's written about the deep state in America for quite a while. He's written some great books, but he calls it the Trumpenstein Project. But even he does not know where it's going. There's so much good hope there. There's the hopeful part. There's also the regressive part. We don't know where to pin him. Now, people say he's playing 5D chess, and I don't know about him, but I think that there are some white hats, but there's black hats too. And how do you how can you have Lindsey Graham hanging around the White House with Trump praising him while his own base is booing him?
Yeah.
How can he have Albert Bourla come to the White House and introduce him as Albert Bourla, that great businessman, while his base boos him? How can he keep this up?
Yeah. There's something that there was a very important moment in Rome that I think was instrumental in transforming Rome from a republic, and it was already sliding into imperial behavior, but it still had a residue of being a republic for quite some time. But after the Civil War, when Julius Caesar dies, he gets killed. There's a civil war that's waged for many years, and by about 43 BC, there's a meeting that happens on the Isle of Capri between leading representatives, high priests from the cult of Mithra, and Emperor Octavius, the nephew of Julius Caesar, who defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra. And there's a big fight over like where was going to be the throne of the new empire, the new reconstituted Babylonian Empire. Was it going to be Rome or was it going to be Alexandria? There was a big that was a big part of the war, the civil war between Mark Antony versus the Octavian group. So anyway, Mark Antony loses. We know what happened to them, and it seems like Rome becomes the seat. It's decided that that's going to be the throne of the new empire. And this particular arrangement, there was a deal worked out to create a new type of structure that had never been in existence in Rome around this deification, this god man of the emperor that would be a god and a man. And the cult of the emperor, over which the various mystery cults would be set up, and you could have a variety. You could be the cult you could worship at Venus or whatever you wanted, or
you could absorb all the religions of the empire into this one cult.
Yeah, it was very malleable, very, very malleable. It just only worked as long as you had polytheistic religions that denied a singular truth. The second you had something like a Christianity emerged that rejected all of the other infinite truths that were possible, it didn't work out. The equation broke down. But the point being is, I think that when I look at the cult of Mithra in its modern incarnation, it didn't disappear after the Roman Empire collapsed. The cult of Mithra continued. It became the Knights Templar. It became also, I would say, the Knights Hospitaller. It created both orders as a left-hand, right-hand path at the same time to oversee the Crusades. That's always the way. They always create twos. They don't create ones, right? They create the Franciscans and the Dominicans at the same time. Right. One to be a more like malleable feminine energy absorption thing, talk, be hyper empathic to the point that you're like, giving sermons to birds and dogs, versus
St. Francis of Assisi.
For St. Francis of Assisi, right? And then you got the Dominican, his buddy St. Francis of Guzman, is creating the Dominican order to be the more like, masculine penetration, top down. We're going to run the Inquisition type of scorched. Yeah. We are God's dogs that will light the earth on fire with the flames of Jesus. So you got these two things but they work together to get the same effect. Yeah. So I think that the cult of Mithra in its various incarnations has largely, I see that at the heart of Silicon Valley and the Stanford Research Institute.
Okay.
The whole Esalen Institute actually that sprung up in California was the seat of the cult of Mithra that created transhumanism in America as a new name for something that had already been there since the ancient times. Yeah, that there'd be an overlord class of master bloods that would shape the destiny of the lower Untermenschen. Yeah. So that's the sort of thing that I'm seeing synergize right now. That Elon Musk's grandfather was certainly a part of. That's really come in as the Silicon Valley big tech thing. And they're highly influential, as we know, around Trump. And I think that there's sort of a reset of humanity around the idea of finally getting rid of the last residues of republicanism amidst this kind of demolition of the transatlantic banking system, and the reconstitution of what was formerly a republic around a restoration of the high Roman Empire in its more direct sense. And I do see Trump has a certain psychological issues that incline me to think that there's certain parallels with the Apollonian figure of the emperor of Rome and the Apollonian sort of image. Look inside of his Trump Tower luxury apartments to live with so much
Have a golden toilet.
golden toilets and Greco gildings and everything, and it's a little bit too much, So whether that's, I don't, I think that,
Seems to be more symbolic, though.
yeah, it's symbolic. I don't think he's literally sees himself as God, but I think that there are people who are working his ego and nudging him to play that kind of role in their way. And I'm hoping that, again, there's enough patriotism inside of his heart and within people like Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard, and hopefully there's a few others that have some moral caliber and fiber that can navigate through this.
And it's weird because Russell Dobler of Do Dissidents also often talks about this, that his base, that more than 50% of his base is not on board with his more extreme ideas. They're with him with the idea of make America great again, like his instincts about ending the foreign wars, bringing the soldiers back home, rebuilding the country, rebuilding roads and bridges, tackling the homeless crisis and the opioid crisis, and actually bringing manufacturing and industry back to America. So if you do decide to do a tariff war, you'll win. Because if he's trying to do a tariff war with China, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. We've shipped our industrial base over to China. They have all the leverage in this, because all they'd have to do to win a trade war is stop shipping our shit to Walmart and Rona for 1 week, and we'd have mass panic in the streets. Yeah. I don't know who's in charge of Trump's ear, but his instincts might be good. But I think that, and the other thing with him is he kind of implements policies because from the last person that he talked to, like the last guy in the room gets to say what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I sense that there is definitely a method behind this, but I just don't know if it's a good method. And you do have these accelerationists all over the place who, I mean, the accelerationists as a movement, it comes out of both the Wiccan movement of the 1930s and 40s, as well as the Crowleyite operations of the Argentum Astrum order, and another thing that Crowley's magical son Stansfield Jones, Frater Akkad, created in like 1907, which was what was it called? The Integral Fellowship of the Mahakakra. Crazy bad operations that went on and played a bigger role in our world than people realize. These things that most people are hearing me speak right now, they have no idea what I'm saying. But if people look into it, Google it, you will find that these entities, these Rosicrucian dark esoteric agencies, had more of a role to play in the worst things that happened in the last century than you would realize. And a lot of it is tied to certain ideas in play currently. I would also say you got it in Russia too. There's factions within Russia that represent this Crowleyite movement. Alexander Dugin just being one person who was a major follower of Aleister Crowley. Yeah. You got certain factions in Europe as well. I won't say any more than that, but I'm just saying, like,
and famously in the United States, like the Jet Propulsion Laboratory connection to the occult with Jack Parsons and a guy named Apollo O. Smith, and that whole thing. Basically, and the founding of NASA, which in Hebrew means to deceive. The whole thing is.
Does it really? Oh, yeah. That's funny. That's funny. I didn't know that. Yeah. Well, I mean, Hubbard as well. L. Ron Hubbard as well is a disciple of Crowley. They were doing Babylon working rituals to try to like usher in the Antichrist in the desert with Jack Parsons before.
I mean, do they really believe that stuff, or was that just an excuse to have a party and screw women?
No, I think they're totally into it. I think at the top, I think at the top they're really superstitious. Like they really, really are into it. I think at the top.
So like Alex Jones famously said about 20 years ago when he first infiltrated Bohemian Grove and filmed all that stuff, and he said to his audience, he says, I know you guys don't believe in what they're doing, But what if they do? What if they really believe that they sold their soul to the devil? What if they
Yeah.
really believe that, and then they film themselves in all these uncompromising positions? So they have blackmail on each other. So there's no place else but to go forward with their satanic agenda, because they're all, but like band of brothers. In Macbeth, he says, "When I wade through the blood, halfway through the stream of blood, there's no sense going back. Might as well keep going forward."
Yeah, they're so far down the rabbit hole. No, I think you're like at a certain point. I think you're right. You can't, if you've given up so much of your humanity and you've enmeshed yourself in this new delusion that you've created. And I think the only one thing I got from Lyndon LaRouche, he wrote this paper in 1978 called "The Secrets Known Only to the Inner Elites," and he makes the point that the oligarchies, one of their big Achilles heels is that they rule by sacred stories and coming up with sacred myths that are designed to, like, they're lies, but they're designed to lock their victims, the masses of humanity, into the shackles of their senses, which is another way of saying Plato's cave, right? The belief in the shadows. And the Achilles heel, though, is that over a few generations, the oligarchy starts believing their own sacred myths. So the more it perpetuates, and the more they groom the humanity out of their children, and have them tuned to the idea that, we're maybe the offspring of the illegitimate children of Jesus who didn't die but actually had babies with Mary Magdalene and lived out in southern France, and that's the special divine starseed blood of the Archon Jesus, which is like they have this whole weird tapestry that Jesus is Satan, that Jesus is Lucifer. That's the Sethian Gospels, right? He's the avatar of the great evil, but is also the great good, because evil is good. And thus our blood of the royals of Europe is the blood of Jesus, and that's why King Henry VIII can become the head of the church, because
he has the blood of Jesus in him, and he's divine.
Yeah.
The divine right of kings is built on that whole thing. People don't realize the divine right of kings is built on the idea that, and that's why they call themselves blue bloods, is that they're descended from divine royalty. And kind of crazy. Yeah. So I wanted to quickly, coming back to Canada, I'm going to share the screen now. You think Mark Carney is going to get back in? And here's my candidate page. I'm running for the PPC in Saskatoon South. There's my candidate page on People's Party of Canada. You can go see that. If you want to get involved, please do. You can volunteer. You can donate. There's my story. I'll tell you about my story. I'm a working class guy trying to get into the House of Parliament to become an MP, to shake things up, because I think it's time that we have a working class sentiment back in the professional managerial classes house of cards, that I can maybe throw some, maybe knock some cards over, but. So I'm famously, I was a leftist my whole life, liberal, not classic liberal, but also a confirmed socialist. Tommy Douglas was my hero. I have his book, The Road to Jerusalem, right there. I was one of his heroes, because he famously started a populist movement in the 1930s that got the farmers and the working class together, and actually became a strong third party enough to actually do some good things, right? So I'm hoping that the People's Party of Canada become a populist movement itself, become a strong third party, and be able to get in there eventually to try to influence the way we're going. Because I've met Maxime and I've spent time with him. I was the campaign manager for Saskatoon West in the last election. When they were doing the draconian lockdowns and mandates, I protested against it. I got 8 tickets for $50,000. He came out west when we were doing underground town halls, because you couldn't gather in people of more than 5 or else you get fined. So we were sneaking around doing underground town halls, and Maxime was talking to farmers and businessmen and all that. And then we decided, and then we did open town halls through Western Canada and Alberta, BC. I got to know him really well. And I like a lot of his ideas, his principles and values. And I think he's learned from his mistakes when he was a cabinet minister. I know people talk about him being part of the Privy Council, but I also know he's not a big fan of the monarchy. And he's actually come out publicly stating, do we really need a king? He's talking more and more about getting out of NATO. He's talking more and more about completely divorcing ourselves from the whole UN agenda, not just leaving the Paris Accords and the World Health Organization, but we've got to actually become sovereign ourselves. He's starting to sound like a right-wing version of Mel Hertig from the National Party in the 1980s, another one of the guys I admire so much. So that's why I'm doing this. People say, you're splitting the vote. That's where I'm getting to after all was wrong about. How can you split the vote? Because every PPC guy I know will never vote for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party, which sold us out under Brian Mulroney in the Rio Agreement in Argentina, and Stephen Harper, who famously talking about enlightened sovereignty, went and genuflected at the World Economic Forum to Klaus Schwab and talked about keeping immigration high to replenish our workforce because we got to grow economically. And then we get, of course, to the point where the immigration thing is so crazy. We have so many illegals here driving housing prices down, and we have foreign governments buying property, I don't know if it's foreign governments, but foreign influence, basically, right, driving up our property costs to such a degree where they're buying these properties, especially out west in Vancouver and stuff, and driving up the property prices, but they're not even there. They're not renting them out. They're sitting vacant, but they're helping driving the. So what I like Maxime's ideas. I know we're going to have a hard time even matching our vote totals last time because of this whole thing. And do you think that this whole thing about Trump and Poilievre both fighting Trump is being done on purpose to make sure that there's no way the People's Party of Canada can even get in there because we're being stopped. Maxime is stopped from going on to the debate stage. People say, well, he's working for the Liberals. He must be working for the Liberals because a vote for Pierre or a vote for Maxime is a vote for the Liberals. Well, why are the Liberals also colluding to keep him off the debate stage? His ideas are so popular and they would cause such a ruckus and cause such a national debate. They can't have it. He has to be painted in a demonic, he has to be demonized. And so it seems to be almost like on purpose to keep the People's Party not even close.
The closest thing to like the only authentic like program to actually get some serious ideas that are needed for the survival of Canada and humanity more generally is coming out of the People's Party. There's nothing else that's out there. I mean, as you know, I mean, I alluded to this, but I volunteered for a decade with Lyndon LaRouche, who would run for the presidency many times and often didn't get very high numbers, and I mean, I worked in Canada with the Committee for the Republic of Canada for many, many years. And so I'm a firm believer of you do something because it's right, not because it's popular. And I mean, if everyone abided by their conscience, we'd be in a very different world right now. But so many people, they just end up wanting to do things that are expedient, that their friends are doing, or they want to just be on the winning team, or they'll just stay at home. You know, like how many people are going to stay at home and not even vote? As is the case in almost every election, there's so many people who if they just chose to toughen up a little bit, go out, vote, you would play a big role and get a lot more good people elected into positions where they could actually speak truth to power in Parliament. That's not happening because the only people voting are the people who are either already sold on an idea. And anyway, my point being is we should definitely. I'm going to vote People's Party. Yeah. I'm always encouraging other people who have looked into the way the world works and is miswired to do the same thing. And don't give your friends or family or neighbors who are saying I'm going to just stay home and not vote, or I'm going to just vote for the lesser of evils. Don't let them off the hook with that stuff. Like have a good healthy moral debate about what's the right thing to do at this point, because we're not going to have a lot more opportunities to get out of this burning house. There's not that much.
Well, I've always said voting for the lesser of two evils just guarantees more evil. Yeah. And like I said, the People's Party of Canada embraces both the classic liberalism, classic libertarianism, and classic conservatism. It can be things to all people. People say, well, they will get rid of our socialized healthcare system. Our socialized healthcare system is a mess. My dad broke his hip, and I went up to visit him in the Prince Albert Hospital, and that place is overrun, underemployed. We're throwing money after money after our, but they say, well, it's our free healthcare system. No, it doesn't. Nothing's free. 30% of your taxes go towards propping it up. Maybe we could re-examine that, have a mixture of privatized and public healthcare, and improve things like Germany's healthcare system. What's wrong with that? Wow, you're just... So you've got to fight through all that stuff. But I do believe that you vote your conscience and your values, and that's the way to go forward. Before we leave, I wanted to share this. This is your Rising Tide Foundation. People should go to this website, the risingtidefoundation.net. And boy, I mean, you could spend a few hours here. Breaking America, how bioregionalists seek to dismantle the nation state. Lincoln's fight to revive the American system. The post-Kennedy era, how can America now be rebuilt? On universal history in Canada. I mean, as far as an intellectual pursuit, you could spend weeks and weeks just reading through all this stuff. It's wonderful. And I like your idea of a rising tide lifts all boats. So can you share your vision about the risingtidefoundation.net? I know your wife is involved and you have other people involved with that. And I've always liked that saying that a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's what we should be getting back to. If you want to talk about a post-national state, I think we got to start talking about a post-war Earth, a post-war world where we trade in ideas and economically try to uplift each other instead of trying to dominate each other. I think that's the only way forward. And as far as spirituality goes, we're all worshiping the same God. Why are we killing each other over how we worship him?
Yeah, right. Just be human. Like, we just need to be human. And the oligarchy only thrives when we think that we have to live by the laws of the jungle.
Yeah.
And even the jungle, actually, when you really look even at these YouTube videos and you see like how animals even have a synergy and a you got crocodiles cooperating with little birds to like pick their teeth, and there's more civility in the jungle than there is amongst human society half the time.
I remember watching a video where there's shark cleaning stations where these sharks glide up to this area beside a reef, and all these tiny fish jump inside the shark's mouth and start picking all the barnacles and parasites off them. And I'm going, they're getting along better than humans do. What are you talking about?
No, exactly. No, I think all of these things, when we just look at the evidence that the universe is created in a harmonious way, that we are a part of the fabric of that universe, and thus we should be able to rationally discover those harmonious laws within nature if we're not so committed to a particular Darwinian interpretation of evolution, but we're a little bit more open to see where does the Darwinian system of might makes right, in the biological domain, where does it break down? Like when you see these phenomena, or like, mommy tigers adopting a baby pig, which it would normally eat, but there's something more going on that the Darwinian system can't account for. But when you look at that and you start seeing, okay, well, human beings are actually less happy. We're more physically, mentally, spiritually deprived and depraved when we adapt to a system of empire that wants us to behave like wolves against wolves, or this Hobbesian idea of we're wolves to the weak. That's all humans are. When we allow ourselves to adapt to that, we get dumber, we get more depressed, we're less happy. And when we act according to principles that are tied to loving our neighbor, loving ourselves, thinking about the future, like having dialogue before we take a punch, or not just running away from a debate or fighting the person physically, but having an honest dialogue around ideas, we're happier. We create more peace. We live longer. We live better. All of these good things happen, and that's just being human. And the oligarchy hates it. I think the oligarchy's been trying hard to come up with sort of a science of evil that they've been getting better at, unfortunately, over a long period of time. And the good guys haven't really been as rigorous. And we've allowed ourselves, and people are born good. I think every baby is born good. But we've allowed ourselves to be too sloppy intellectually. We haven't self-examined as much as we should if we're going to be qualified to do what Ben Franklin was able to do and carry out a serious positive conspiracy in opposition to the oligarchy with a higher vision that the oligarchy is afraid of. That's the sort of thing that we need to tap back into fast.
I'd like for you to getting back to how we started this conversation with Ben Franklin. And I just want to have to say that the best part of I'm a Christian, and I'm not a Christian because of the Bible or the entirety of the Bible and what I've learned. I'm a Christian because I believe in Jesus' vision that if you do unto others as you would have them do unto you, that we would live. That's the life we need to live. And you can throw out the whole Old Testament, you can throw out all the rest of the New Testament, and just leave that one sentence in there, and that's the Bible. I've always believed that, and that's why I think there is a chance to move forward. And I want to quickly share this screen. This is Matthew. This is your X. If people want to go to your X, Ehret Ehret at _ Matthew Ehret. Please go to his X and subscribe to his X. Definitely check out risingfoundations.net. Thank you so much, Matthew, for sharing that. We've got to do more shows. I mean, we only scratched the surface, and I did want to get a bit of the political angle there about the upcoming election and the whole idea of this. Everything's like this psychological operation being run against the Canadian voter. You have to vote either liberal or conservative, or else everything's going to go to shit. When they're both the same, basically being run by the same people. Yeah. And it's the same old thing we're talking about with this whole show about how when the Dominican order was set up at the same time as the other order, at the same time as dual, as a dichotomy, as who was that guy that made a famous thing, and I forget what he called it again. Maybe you can help me. It's a philosophical idea that you have two opposing forces working.
The Hegelian
dialectic.
Yeah, the synthesis, antithesis. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Yeah.
Yes, and so you create a problem, and then the people say, we want you to fix that problem, and you already have the ready-made solution for them. And I think that's what's happening right now, and people are falling for it again. And I keep trying to tell people, why do you keep falling for this? And anybody who votes for Mark Carney, I really think is a screw loose. I mean, just a little bit of research into his background, my God, the Brookfield assets management thing and all that stuff. But similarly, Pierre Poilievre is a career politician. I've seen interviews with him where he talks about how if Israel bombed Iran, that'd be the greatest thing for humanity. What do you mean? Starting World War III would be the best thing for humanity? So you kind of wonder where he is at. And both of them support Ukraine. Both of them pander to ethnic minorities to get votes. And it seems to be that we're being led again to a false choice. And we're being told, well, don't split the vote. Well, don't listen to that, because the only way forward is to actually go get independent with your thinking. Think back to other populist movements that have happened in the past that have actually done some wonderful stuff, like the Martin Luther King Jr. marches that people said would never work, and they actually did. Nonviolent protest works. Mahatma Gandhi the Freedom Convoy. Sure, it was cracked down on, but it changed this country. We might have been going to vaccine mandates, vaccine passports. We were going down that road until the Freedom Convoy famously went to Ottawa and nonviolently protested and changed the world immediately. I think it changed the world, but it certainly changed what happened in this country, because when that Freedom Convoy happened here in Saskatchewan, Scott Moe, who before was letting Sadiq Shahab, a public health chief officer, running our policy, all of a sudden with the stroke of the pen say, okay, all the mandates, all the restrictions are gone, boom, done. Proving it was political the whole time. So it can work. You have to really get involved, though. And we need to recapture that spirit really bad. I think what happened during the Canadian Freedom Convoy, the freedom movement that sprung up, how everybody was working together, that's what we got to get back to. But when they took all the mandates, restrictions away, a lot of these people went back to sleep. And you can't blame some of them, because they're working 2-3 jobs just to make ends meet. They have their own problems. But for the good of humanity, for the good of the future of our country, it's time to get back up off your arses. Think independently, and hey, vote for the People's Party of Canada. Vote independent if you want, but don't go for one of these establishment parties that are controlled by these demonic forces, these internationalist, corporatist, globalist banksters that do not have your best interest in mind. They only have their own interest in mind. Remember, they want you to own nothing, and they'll be happy. Thank you so much, Matthew, for showing up tonight, and we'll have to do this again. And remember, people, conventional wisdom can only get you so far. If you want to really know the truth, you have to go beyond the pale. Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.